Ambassador Kethavar had been studying humans for 3 years before he got the chance to meet them face to face. His people, the Zephyrians, were careful about first contact with new species. They wanted to know everything about a race before they opened diplomatic talks. The data files on humans made them seem like a peaceful people. They had no big wars between stars and mostly solved their problems by talking rather than fighting. The human ship called UES Defender looked clean and well-maintained when Kethavar's transport docked with it. The metal corridors were bright and everything seemed to be in perfect order. Captain Jake Morrison met him at the airlock. The human was tall with brown hair and calm blue eyes. He wore a dark blue uniform with silver marks that showed his rank. When he smiled and offered his hand for what humans called a handshake, Kethavar felt surprised by how warm and friendly the gesture seemed. "Welcome aboard." "Ambassador," Morrison said in perfect galactic standard, "I hope your journey was comfortable." Kethavar had expected the meeting to be more formal, but Morrison acted like they were old friends. The captain walked beside him through the ship, pointing out different areas and explaining how things worked. Other crew members they passed all nodded politely but continued with their duties. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy with their work. Dr. Lisa Grant joined them in the main conference room. She was a small woman with red hair tied back in a neat style. Her job was to study alien species and help with communication problems. She carried a small device that recorded everything they said. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "We are very excited to learn about your culture," she told Kethavar. "This is the first time we have met beings from outside our local star group." The conference room had a large window that showed the blue and white planet Earth below them. Kethavar had seen pictures before, but seeing it in person made him understand why humans loved their homeworld so much. The colors were bright and beautiful, and he could see white clouds moving slowly across the surface. Morrison brought them drinks. For himself and Dr. Grant, he poured a dark liquid called coffee. For Kethavar, he had prepared a mixture of minerals dissolved in water that was safe for Zephyrian biology. The thoughtfulness impressed the ambassador. "Shall we begin with trade agreements?" Morrison asked as they all sat down at the long table. The next few hours went very well. Humans wanted to trade their food products and entertainment media for Zephyrian medical technology and star charts. The terms seemed fair to both sides. Morrison and Dr. Grant asked intelligent questions and listened carefully to Kethavar's answers. They took notes and sometimes asked for clarification when they did not understand something. Commander Ryan Blake, the ship's tactical officer, stayed in the background during most of the meeting. He was a quiet man with dark skin and serious eyes. Kethavar noticed that Blake often looked around the room and checked his communication device. At first, this seemed strange, but then Kethavar decided it was probably normal military behavior. "Your species seems very interested in peaceful cooperation," Kethavar said during a break in the discussions. "The galaxy needs more civilizations like yours." Morrison and Dr. Grant exchanged a quick look that Kethavar almost missed. There was something in that look he could not quite understand, but it was gone so fast he thought he might have imagined it. "We prefer to solve problems through discussion when possible," Morrison replied. "War is expensive and wasteful. We have learned this lesson well in our own history." They talked about cultural exchanges next. Humans wanted to send students to Zephyrian universities, and they offered to host Zephyrian scientists at their research centers. Dr. Grant became very excited when she talked about the different ways their species might learn from each other. "Think of all the knowledge we could share," she said. Her eyes were bright with enthusiasm. "Medicine, engineering, art, music. We could make both our civilizations stronger." The afternoon moved into evening by ship time. Kethavar felt very pleased with how the talks were going. These humans seemed exactly like the peaceful, reasonable people his intelligence reports had described. They were smart, friendly, and eager to build good relationships with their new neighbors in space. Morrison ordered dinner to be brought to the conference room so they could continue talking while they ate. The human food was simple but tasty. Kethavar enjoyed trying the different flavors. Dr. Grant asked him many questions about Zephyrian cooking and family customs. Her genuine interest made him feel welcome and respected. As they discussed territorial boundaries and shipping lanes, Kethavar felt confident that this would be the beginning of a long and profitable friendship between their species. The humans had shown nothing but kindness and wisdom during their entire meeting. Their ship was peaceful, their crew was professional, and their leaders were intelligent and fair. Commander Blake continued to monitor his devices throughout the evening, but this no longer seemed unusual to Kethavar. Military officers probably had many duties to attend to even during diplomatic meetings. Sometimes Blake would whisper something to Morrison, but it was always quiet and brief. The stars were visible through the conference room window now. Earth's night side showed tiny lights where human cities glowed in the darkness. It looked peaceful and beautiful. Kethavar thought about how wonderful it would be to visit the planet's surface someday and see those cities up close. "I think we have made excellent progress today," Morrison said as they finished their meal. "Tomorrow we can discuss the details of our agreements and perhaps tour more of the ship." Dr. Grant nodded enthusiastically. "I would love to show you our research laboratories and maybe demonstrate some of our science equipment." Kethavar felt tired but happy as he prepared to return to his guest quarters. The day had gone better than he had dared to hope. These humans would make wonderful allies for the Zephyrian collective. Their peaceful nature and desire for cooperation would bring stability to this region of the galaxy. Then the alarms started screaming. Red lights began flashing throughout the ship. A loud warning sound echoed through the corridors. Commander Blake jumped to his feet and ran to a wall panel, his fingers flying over the controls. Dr. Grant went pale and grabbed the edge of the table. Morrison's friendly expression disappeared completely. In its place was something cold and hard that made Kethavar's protective scales stand up without his permission. The change happened so fast it seemed like a different person was suddenly sitting at the table. "What is the situation, Blake?" Morrison's voice was completely different now. Gone was the warm, diplomatic tone. This voice was sharp and commanding. "Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace," Blake reported. His own voice had changed too, becoming crisp and professional. "Configuration matches Vortak Armada vessels. They are targeting our position." Kethavar felt his heart sink. The Vortak were known throughout the galaxy as destroyers. They conquered planets and enslaved entire species. If they had found Earth, then this beautiful, peaceful world was about to become a battlefield. Morrison stood up slowly. The friendly captain who had welcomed Kethavar aboard his ship was completely gone. In his place stood someone who looked like a predator preparing to hunt. The Vortak ships appeared on the main screen like dark shadows against the stars. Kethavar had seen pictures of their vessels before, but seeing them in person made his blood run cold. Each ship was 3 times the size of the human vessel they were on. The largest one, which had to be the flagship, was so massive it blocked out entire sections of the star field behind it. "How many ships?" Morrison asked. His voice stayed calm, but Kethavar could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. 15 heavy cruisers and 1 dreadnought, Blake reported. "The dreadnought is the Deathbringer, Admiral Vextar's personal ship." Dr. Grant made a small sound that might have been fear or despair. She looked at Kethavar with wide eyes. "I am sorry you have to see this," she said quietly. This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. Kethavar felt confused. Any reasonable species would be preparing to surrender or evacuate by now. The Vortak were famous across the galaxy for their cruelty and power. Their ships could destroy planets. No one fought them and won. "All hands, this is the captain." Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "We have hostile contacts in the system. All civilian vessels are to evacuate immediately to Luna Base. All military vessels will assume defensive formation. This is not a drill." Lieutenant Kate Murphy's voice came through the speakers from the bridge. "Sir Admiral Vextar is broadcasting on all frequencies. He demands immediate surrender of all human forces and the diplomatic vessel." Morrison walked to the window and looked out at the enemy ships. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned back to his crew with an expression that made Kethavar want to step backward. "Transmit the following message to all ships in the fleet," Morrison said. "Code authorization, Broken Arrow Protocol. All vessels are weapons-free. Engage the enemy." Dr. Grant went completely white. She grabbed Kethavar's arm with shaking fingers. "Broken Arrow means no retreat," she whispered. "No surrender. Fight until every ship is destroyed." Kethavar could not believe what he was hearing. These humans were going to fight the Vortak Armada. It was suicide. The enemy had overwhelming firepower and numbers. Even if the humans fought bravely, they would all be dead within an hour. "Captain Morrison," Kethavar said, standing up quickly, "you must reconsider. The Vortak fleet is too strong. Your people will all die for nothing." Morrison looked at him with eyes that seemed to belong to a completely different species from the friendly diplomat who had welcomed him aboard. "Ambassador, with respect, you do not understand what you are dealing with. The Vortak have made a mistake. They have threatened our home." Blake was working frantically at his control station. Numbers and tactical displays flashed across multiple screens. "Enemy fleet is moving into attack formation," he reported. "Estimated time to weapons range 12 minutes. Signal the fleet," Morrison ordered. "All ships advance to contact. Do not let them get close to Earth." Through the window, Cathvar could see the human ships beginning to move. There were only 8 vessels in the defensive fleet, tiny compared to the massive Vortak warships. They looked like children's toys facing giants. Lieutenant Murphy's voice came through the speakers again. "Captain, the UES Guardian is reporting they are ready for battle." All other ships confirmed the same. Morrison nodded. "Tell them to remember their training and remember what they are fighting for." Dr. Grant was still holding Kethavar's arm. Her scientific equipment lay forgotten on the table. "I have been studying human psychology for years," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "But I have never seen this before. They are becoming something else." Kethavar watched Commander Blake work at his station. The man's fingers moved across the controls with deadly precision. His earlier quiet professionalism had been replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. There was a gleam in his eyes that reminded Kethavar of predators on his homeworld. "First salvo incoming," Blake announced. The ship shook as enemy fire struck their shields. Warning lights flashed red throughout the conference room. On the screen, Kethavar could see streams of energy weapons fire crossing space between the 2 fleets. "Return fire," Morrison ordered. "Target their lead cruiser." The human weapons were much smaller than the Vortak guns, but they fired much faster. Streams of bright blue energy lanced out from the human ships toward their enemies. When they hit, they created beautiful but deadly explosions across the dark hulls of the Vortak vessels. "Direct hit on target 1, Murphy reported. "Minimal damage to enemy shields." Kethavar felt his hopes sinking even further. The human weapons were barely scratching the enemy ships. This was going to be a massacre. Then something happened that changed everything. The UES Guardian, one of the smaller human ships, took a direct hit from a Vortak plasma cannon. The explosion tore through the ship's hull and it began venting atmosphere and debris into space. Kethavar waited for the crew to abandon ship or surrender. Instead, the damaged vessel turned directly toward the nearest Vortak cruiser and accelerated to maximum speed. "Guardian is making a ramming attack," Blake reported. His voice carried a note of what sounded almost like pride. Morrison watched the screen without any expression at all. "Signal Guardian and ask for final message." A woman's voice came through the speakers, calm despite the background noise of alarms and explosions. "This is Captain Amy Collins of the Guardian. Tell my kids I love them and that I died protecting their future." "Collins out!" The Guardian struck the Vortak cruiser at full speed. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire and twisted metal that lit up the darkness of space like a new star. The effect on the human fleet was immediate and shocking. Instead of being demoralized by the loss of one of their ships, the remaining vessels seemed to become more aggressive. They began moving in patterns that made no tactical sense according to any military doctrine Kethavar had ever studied. "Sir?" Blake said, turning to Morrison with eyes that now looked completely wild. "Request permission to implement Doctrine 7. Morrison was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but somehow more frightening than any shout could have been. "Granted. Signal all ships. Execute Doctrine 7. Show them why evolution made us hunters." Dr. Grant made a sound like a sob. "Doctrine 7 is not officially recognized by the military," she said to Kethavar. "It is something from our past. Something we were supposed to have left behind when we reached the stars." Kethavar watched in fascination and growing horror as the human ships stopped fighting like a coordinated military force. Instead, they began to move like a pack of wild animals. They used the debris from the destroyed ships as cover for ambush attacks. They coordinated their movements in ways that seemed to require no communication at all. Lieutenant Murphy's voice had changed too. When she reported targeting information, there was something in her tone that made Kethavar's skin crawl. She sounded like she was enjoying herself. "Target lock on Cruiser 3, she announced. "Firing solution optimal." The human weapons struck their target and punched through weakened shields. This time the damage was severe. Atmosphere and burning debris poured out of holes in the Vortak ship's hull. Confirmed kill, Murphy said. There was definitely pleasure in her voice now. Morrison stood at the window watching the battle with the calm attention of a scientist observing an experiment. But Kethavar could see something in his posture that suggested barely controlled violence. They are remembering, Dr. Grant said quietly. For thousands of years, my species survived by being better predators than anything else on our planet. We learned to cooperate, to use tools, to think strategically. But underneath all our civilization, we are still the creatures that climbed to the top of the food chain by being more dangerous than everything, that tried to eat us. Another Vortex ship exploded as 3 human vessels coordinated an attack that seemed to ignore their own safety completely. The enemy had superior weapons and armor, but they were fighting like individual ships. The humans were fighting like parts of a single incredibly dangerous organism. Enemy fleet is beginning to show confusion in their formations, Blake reported. They are not used to prey that fights back this way. Morrison smiled for the first time since the battle began. It was not a pleasant expression. Signal the fleet. Tell them to make the Vortak remember why some species should not be hunted. The battle continued to rage around them as Kethavar watched through the conference room window. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human ships moved in patterns that seemed to follow no logical strategy, yet somehow they were winning engagements against vastly superior forces. Dr. Grant had stopped taking notes entirely. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. This is not how we were supposed to be, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. We spent centuries learning to be better than this. On the main screen, the UES Retribution was burning from multiple hits. Half its weapons were offline, and it was venting atmosphere from several hull breaches. Any rational crew would have withdrawn to make repairs or abandoned ship entirely. Instead, Captain Collins's replacement, a woman named Amy Peterson, opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. This is Retribution. We are going to take that big bastard with us. Peterson out. The damaged ship turned toward the largest Vortak cruiser and began accelerating. Its remaining engines burned at maximum power, pushing the vessel far beyond safe operational limits. The Vortak ship tried to maneuver away, but the human vessel was smaller and more agile. They are going to ram again, Blake reported. His voice carried a note of what could only be described as approval. Morrison watched without changing expression. Honor their sacrifice. All ships concentrate fire on the cruiser's engines. Do not let it escape. The collision was devastating. The Retribution struck the Vortak cruiser just behind its main weapon arrays. Both ships were destroyed instantly, but the explosion damaged 2 other enemy vessels badly enough to take them out of the fight. The response from the human fleet was immediate and terrifying. Instead of mourning their losses, the remaining ships seemed to become even more aggressive. They began using tactics that no civilized military would ever consider. Lieutenant Murphy's voice came through the speakers with a musical quality that made Kethavar's protective scales stand up. Target acquired. Firing pattern Delta. Let us see how they like a taste of their own medicine. The human weapon systems had been reconfigured somehow. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships quickly, they were now targeting specific systems. Life support, artificial gravity, crew quarters. The attacks were designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death. Sir, Blake said, turning to Morrison with eyes that gleamed with anticipation. The enemy flagship is moving to attack position. Admiral Vextar is probably getting impatient. Morrison nodded slowly. Signal the fleet. All ships prepare for final engagement. Make them remember this day. Dr. Grant looked at Kethavar with an expression of desperate apology. I want you to understand that this is not who we choose to be. But when survival is at stake, we become what evolution made us. The Vortak flagship Deathbringer was moving toward Earth. It was easily 10 times the size of the largest human vessel and armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Its approach should have been the end of any hope for human victory. Instead, the remaining human ships began to move in a coordination pattern that seemed impossible. Without any apparent communication, they formed a complex 3-dimensional formation around the massive enemy vessel. Each ship took a specific position that allowed it to cover the blind spots of its companions, while maintaining optimal firing angles. How are they doing that? Kethavar asked. The coordination was too perfect for individual ship commanders to achieve without detailed planning. Pack hunting, Dr. Grant replied quietly. It is hardwired into our species. When we face a large predator, we instinctively know how to work together to bring it down. The attack began with surgical precision. The human ships darted in and out of the Deathbringer's weapon range, striking at specific points on its hull before withdrawing. Each attack seemed small and insignificant, but together they began to have a cumulative effect. Enemy flagship is showing structural stress in sections 7 through 12, Blake reported. There was satisfaction in his voice. Their armor is strong, but they did not design it for this kind of sustained harassment. Admiral Vextar's image appeared on the communication screen. The Vortak leader was a massive reptilian creature, with scales that gleamed like metal armor. His eyes burned with rage and confusion. Human Morrison, the alien admiral said in heavily accented galactic standard. Your species fights without honor. You attack like cowardly scavengers rather than warriors. Surrender now and we will grant you quick deaths. Morrison's response was delivered in a voice so calm it was somehow more frightening than any shout could have been. Admiral Vextar, you have made a critical error in your intelligence assessment. You assumed we had forgotten what we really are. The communication channel closed. Morrison turned to his crew with an expression that made even Commander Blake step backward. All ships, final phase. Show them why our ancestors conquered a death world. What happened next would be studied by military historians across the galaxy for generations to come. The human fleet stopped using conventional tactics entirely. Ships that were too damaged to fight effectively began ramming attacks. Crews that had lost their main weapons jury-rigged their reactor cores into improvised bombs. Lieutenant Murphy had completely abandoned standard communication protocols. Her reports now came in short, sharp bursts that sounded more like hunting calls than military updates. Target lock. Strike true. Make them bleed. The Deathbringer began to show serious damage. Its massive armor plating, designed to withstand the weapons of other dreadnoughts, was being torn apart by the relentless attacks of much smaller vessels. The Vortak crew was clearly struggling to respond to tactics they had never encountered before. Sir, Blake said, his voice tight with excitement, I have identified a pattern in their defensive systems. If we can coordinate simultaneous strikes on 7 specific points, we can cause a cascade failure in their main reactor. Morrison looked at the tactical display. The attack would require perfect timing and would certainly result in the destruction of all participating vessels. It was a suicide mission with no possibility of survival for the attacking crews. Signal the fleet, Morrison ordered. Request volunteers for final assault. Kethvar expected a long discussion as ship commanders weighed the risks and benefits. Instead, 7 voices responded immediately. This is Captain Stone of the Valor, ready to strike. Captain Rodriguez of the Phoenix, standing by. Captain White of the Vengeance. Let us finish this. One by one, the volunteers acknowledged their orders. None of them asked about survival chances or extraction plans. They simply accepted that they were going to die to protect their home world. Dr. Grant was crying now, though she tried to hide it. They are not thinking about themselves anymore, she explained to Kethvar. They are thinking about their families, their children, their species. Individual survival does not matter when the tribe is threatened. The final attack developed with mathematical precision. 7 human ships approached their target points from different angles, timing their approach to arrive at exactly the same moment. The Deathbringer's defensive weapons destroyed 3 of them before they could reach their targets, but the remaining 4 completed their mission. The explosions bloomed across the flagship's hull like deadly flowers. Each one represented the sacrifice of an entire crew, men and women who had chosen death to protect their home. The cascade reaction Blake had predicted began immediately. The Deathbringer's main reactor went critical. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a new star that burned briefly in the darkness of space before fading away. Admiral Vextar and his 3,000 crew members died instantly. The remaining Vortak ships, suddenly leaderless and facing an enemy that seemed immune to fear or reason, began to withdraw. One by one, they jumped to hyperspace and fled the system. The silence that followed was somehow more disturbing than the battle itself. The human fleet, or what remained of it, drifted in space surrounded by debris and the bodies of their fallen comrades. Morrison stood at the window looking out at the aftermath. His expression had returned to something approaching normal, but Kethvar could see the cost in the slight tremor of his hands and the way his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. The battlefield was quiet now except for the occasional piece of debris striking the ship's hull. Kethvar looked out at the wreckage scattered across space and tried to process what he had witnessed. Twisted metal that had once been proud warships drifted past the window like the bones of some ancient creature. Casualty report, Morrison requested quietly. Commander Blake checked his displays with hands that shook slightly. 1,437 confirmed dead, sir. No survivors recovered from the destroyed vessels. The numbers hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Nearly 1,500 humans had died in the space of 2 hours. These were not just statistics on a military report. These were people with families, friends, dreams for the future, all gone because they had chosen to fight rather than surrender. Dr. Grant had stopped crying, but her face was pale and drawn. She stared at her hands as if she had never seen them before. "We did this," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "We killed them all." Morrison turned from the window to look at her. "No, Doctor. The Vortak killed them when they decided to attack our home. We simply made sure their deaths had meaning." Lieutenant Murphy's voice came through the speakers, but it sounded different now. The predatory excitement was gone, replaced by exhaustion and something that might have been regret. "Sir, we are receiving surrender broadcasts from the remaining Vortak vessels. They are requesting permission to withdraw from the system." "Grant it," Morrison said immediately. "Let them go home and tell their leaders what happens when you threaten humanity." Kethvar watched the surviving enemy ships jump to hyperspace one by one. The Vortak fleet that had entered the system with overwhelming confidence was fleeing in complete disorder. Only 5 ships escaped out of the original 16. "Captain Morrison," Kethvar said carefully, "I must ask you something that may sound offensive. Did your people plan this? Did you know the Vortak were coming?" Morrison looked at him with tired eyes. "No, Ambassador. We had no advance warning. What you witnessed was not a planned military strategy. It was instinct." Dr. Grant looked up from her hands. "We call it going feral," she explained. "It is something left over from our evolutionary past. When humans are pushed to the edge of extinction, we revert to older patterns of behavior. We become what our ancestors were when they hunted massive predators on our home world." Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean this transformation happens automatically? You cannot control it?" "We can choose whether or not to embrace it," Morrison replied. "But when survival is at stake, it becomes very difficult to resist. The instincts are too strong." Blake was working at his station, coordinating rescue operations for the surviving crew members from damaged ships. His movements were efficient and professional. But Kethvar could see the cost of the battle in the way his shoulders tensed whenever he had to report another confirmed death. "How do you live with it?" Kethvar asked. "How do you function in civilized society knowing that this capacity for violence exists inside you?" Dr. Grant managed a weak smile. "The same way any predator species learns to live in groups. We develop rules, laws, social structures that channel our aggressive instincts in productive directions. Most humans go their entire lives without ever experiencing what you saw today." Morrison walked to the communication console and activated the ship-wide channel. "This is the captain speaking. The enemy has been defeated and Earth is safe. I want to express my gratitude to every member of this crew for their courage and professionalism under extreme circumstances. We will hold memorial services for our fallen comrades tomorrow at 1400 hours. Morrison out." The simple announcement seemed inadequate somehow. How do you summarize the sacrifice of 1,500 lives in a few sentences? How do you honor people who chose to die rather than let their homeworld be conquered? "The families will want to know how they died," Dr. Grant said quietly. "They will want to know that their sacrifice meant something." "It did mean something," Morrison replied firmly. "The Vortak will think twice before attacking another human world. Word of this battle will spread throughout their empire. They will remember that humans are not easy prey." Kethvar looked out at the debris field again. Mixed in with the twisted metal were the bodies of both human and Vortak crew members. Death in space was universal. It did not care about species or politics or who was right or wrong. "I need to send a report to my government," he said. "They will want to know what happened here." Morrison nodded. "Of course. But I hope you will help them understand that what you witnessed is not who we choose to be. It is simply who we become when we have no other choice." Blake approached the group with a data pad in his hands. "Sir, preliminary analysis of the battle suggests that our tactics were approximately 60% more effective than standard fleet engagement protocols. The enemy was completely unprepared for our asymmetric approach." "Asymmetric," Dr. Grant repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what we are calling it now?" We fought like wild animals, and we are going to dress it up in military terminology. Morrison's expression hardened. We fought like humans, Doctor. We used the advantages that evolution gave us to protect our species. There is no shame in that. Lieutenant Murphy appeared in the conference room doorway. She looked tired and older than she had that morning. Sir, Earth Command is requesting a full debrief. They want to understand how we achieved victory against such overwhelming odds. Tell them the truth, Morrison said. Tell them that when humans are threatened with extinction, we remember what we used to be. Murphy nodded and returned to the bridge. Kethvar could hear the sound of normal ship operations resuming in the corridors outside. Crew members were returning to their regular duties, maintaining the vessel, caring for the wounded, preparing reports. Life was continuing despite the massive loss they had suffered. Will it happen again? Kethvar asked. If another enemy threatens your people, will you respond the same way? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Kethvar understand just how much this victory had cost the human captain. I hope we never have to find out, Ambassador. But if the choice is between extinction and embracing our nature, we will choose survival every time. Dr. Grant gathered her abandoned recording equipment from the table. I will need to study the psychological profiles of the crew members who participated in the battle. Command will want to understand the long-term effects of combat stress and behavioral regression. What about the diplomatic mission? Kethvar asked. Do we continue our negotiations? Morrison looked surprised by the question. If you are willing, Ambassador. Though I suspect your government may view humanity differently after your report. Kethvar thought about the peaceful, reasonable humans he had met that morning. Then he thought about the terrifying predators they had become during the battle. Both versions were real. Both were part of the same species. I think my government will be very interested in forming an alliance with humanity, he said finally. But perhaps we will approach the negotiations with a better understanding of who we are dealing with. Blake looked up from his station. Sir, the rescue operations are complete. All surviving crew members have been recovered and are receiving medical attention. Morrison nodded. Very good. Signal Earth Command that the Defender will remain on station for another 48 hours to secure the area, then return to port. The routine military procedures seemed strange after what they had all witnessed. How do you go back to normal operations after watching your species transform into something primal and deadly? How do you file reports and follow protocols when you have seen the true face of human nature? Ambassador, Morrison said as they prepared to leave the conference room, I want you to understand something important. The humans who fought this battle are not monsters. They are parents, teachers, artists, scientists. They chose to become something terrible for a few hours so that their children could continue to live in a civilized world. Kethvar nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their intelligence. It was their ability to sacrifice their own humanity when necessary to preserve the future of their species. 3 days passed before the diplomatic talks resumed. During that time, Kethvar observed the human crew as they returned to their normal routines. The transformation he had witnessed during the battle seemed to have completely reversed itself. The predatory gleam in their eyes was gone, replaced by the professional courtesy he had first encountered. Lieutenant Murphy brought him his morning meal with the same cheerful efficiency she had shown before the battle. Commander Blake discussed tactical theory with the same calm intelligence. Dr. Grant continued her xenobiological studies with renewed scientific curiosity. It was as if the terrifying creatures who had torn apart the Vortak fleet had never existed. But Kethvar could see small signs of what lay beneath the surface. Murphy's hands moved just a fraction too quickly when she checked her weapon systems. Blake's eyes lingered, a moment too long on the tactical displays. Dr. Grant asked pointed questions about Zephyrian defensive capabilities that seemed to have little to do with cultural exchange. You seem troubled. Ambassador, Morrison said as they reconvened in the conference room. The captain appeared completely normal, showing no sign of the cold predator who had orchestrated the destruction of an entire enemy fleet. I am trying to understand how your people managed the transition, Kethvar admitted. How do you go from being civilized diplomats to deadly warriors and then back again so easily? Dr. Grant looked up from her notes. It is not easy, she said quietly. Many of the crew members are struggling with what they did during the battle. We have counselors working with them to process the psychological trauma. Morrison nodded gravely. What you witnessed was necessary for survival, but it came at a cost. Some of our people will carry the memory of that violence for the rest of their lives. The conference room had been repaired and cleaned since the battle. The same comfortable chairs surrounded the same polished table. Earth still turned peacefully below them, showing no sign of the devastation that had nearly befallen it. Only the occasional piece of debris drifting past the window reminded Kethvar of what had happened. Shall we continue with the trade agreements? Morrison asked, as if they were simply resuming a meeting that had been interrupted by a minor technical problem. The next several hours proceeded much as the first day had, but with a different atmosphere. The humans were still polite and professional, but there was an underlying tension that had not been there before. Kethvar found himself studying their faces, looking for signs of the predators he knew lurked beneath their civilized exterior. Your government has sent additional instructions, Blake announced as he handed Kethvar a communication device. They seem very interested in establishing formal relations with humanity. Kethvar read the message with growing amazement. The Zephyrian Collective had received preliminary reports of the battle from long-range sensors. Instead of being horrified by humanity's capacity for violence, they were impressed by their effectiveness against the Vortak. My superiors want to propose a mutual defense treaty, Kethvar said slowly. They believe that an alliance with humanity would provide significant strategic advantages. Morrison exchanged a quick glance with Dr. Grant. What kind of strategic advantages? The Vortak have been expanding into Zephyrian space for the past 50 years, Kethvar explained. We have lost 3 colony worlds to their attacks. Until now, no one has been able to stop them effectively. Dr. Grant leaned forward with interest. You want us to help you fight them? More than that, Kethvar replied. My government wants to understand how you achieved such a decisive victory. They want to learn from your tactics and possibly adapt them for our own forces. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of warning. Ambassador, what you witnessed was not a military tactic that can be taught or replicated. It was an evolutionary response that is specific to human psychology. But surely the basic principles could be adapted, Kethvar insisted. The coordination, the willingness to sacrifice individual ships for strategic advantage, the unpredictable attack patterns. Blake shook his head. The coordination you observed was not planned or practiced. It emerged naturally from human pack-hunting instincts that evolved over millions of years. We could not teach another species to replicate it even if we wanted to. Dr. Grant began typing notes on her datapad. This is fascinating from a xenopsychological perspective. Your people are trying to understand a behavioral pattern that has no analog in their own evolutionary history. What about weapons technology? Kethvar asked. Your ships seem to be much more effective than their size would suggest. Our weapons are not particularly advanced, Morrison explained. The difference was in how we used them. We targeted specific systems to cause maximum disruption rather than trying to achieve quick kills. But again, this was instinctive rather than planned. Kethvar felt frustrated. His government had sent him to learn the secret of humanity's victory. But the humans were telling him there was no secret to learn. It was simply their nature. Perhaps we could arrange for joint training exercises, he suggested. Your military personnel could work with ours to develop new tactical approaches. Morrison's expression became serious. Ambassador, I need you to understand something very important. What you witnessed during the battle was not something we can simply turn on and off for training purposes. The psychological state required for that kind of fighting can only be achieved under genuine life or death circumstances. Are you saying your people cannot fight effectively except when facing extinction? Kethvar asked. No, Morrison replied. We can fight conventionally and we are quite good at it. But the overwhelming victory you witnessed only happens when humans believe their survival as a species is at stake. Dr. Grant looked up from her notes. It is like asking a parent to demonstrate how they would react if their child was in mortal danger. The emotional and physical response cannot be replicated in a training scenario. Blake brought up a tactical display showing the battle from 3 days ago. Look at the patterns of movement and engagement. Notice how our ships seem to anticipate each other's actions without communication. That level of coordination is impossible to achieve through practice or training. Kethvar studied the display carefully. The human ships had indeed moved with an almost supernatural coordination. They seem to function as parts of a single organism rather than individual vessels under separate commands. Your people called it pack hunting, he said slowly. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. For millions of years, humans survived by hunting in coordinated groups. The behavior is hardwired into our neural structure. When we face an existential threat, those ancient patterns reassert themselves. So you are saying that humanity's greatest military advantage cannot be shared or taught to allies? Dr. Grant smiled sadly. Our greatest military advantage is also our greatest weakness, Ambassador. The same instincts that made us unbeatable against the Vortak also make us dangerous to ourselves. Human history is full of wars where we turned that same predatory nature against our own species. Morrison walked to the window and looked out at Earth. We have spent centuries learning to control those instincts, to channel them into productive rather than destructive purposes. The battle you witnessed was necessary, but it was also a reminder of what we used to be. And what you still are when circumstances require it, Kethvar observed. Yes, Morrison admitted, and that is why we prefer to solve problems through diplomacy when possible. Violence should always be the last resort, not because we are incapable of it, but because we are too capable of it. The remainder of the day was spent finalizing the details of their agreements. Trade routes, cultural exchange programs, and communication protocols were all established. By the time they finished, the framework for a lasting alliance between their species was in place. There is one more thing, Morrison said as they concluded their business. I want you to carry a message back to your government. Of course, Kethvar replied. Tell them that humanity values peaceful cooperation above all else. Tell them that we will honor our agreements and treat our allies with respect and fairness. But also tell them that any species that threatens human civilians or attempts to conquer human worlds will face the same fate as the Vortak. Kethvar nodded slowly. The message was both a promise of friendship and a warning to potential enemies. Humanity was offering partnership to those who approached them in peace, but extinction to those who chose war. I will convey your message exactly as you have given it, he promised. Dr. Grant gathered her research materials and stood up from the table. Ambassador, I hope our species will have a long and profitable relationship. But I also hope we never have to demonstrate our military capabilities to you directly. As do I, Doctor, Kethvar replied sincerely. As he prepared to return to his own ship, Kethvar reflected on everything he had learned during his time with the humans. They were a species of contradictions, peaceful but deadly, civilized but savage, rational but driven by ancient instincts. They had the capacity for both great kindness and terrible violence, sometimes existing in the same individual at the same time. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from the Battle of Earth. Humanity could be reasoned with, negotiated with, and trusted as allies.